Hi, I am Verdaillia Turner, and this is Let's Talk. In 2023, we are celebrating Black History Month, and I can't think of any other better way to do that, since I'm an educator, than to be blessed and to feature and have the notable Dr. Calvin Jerome Watts, which is the superintendent of Georgia's largest school district, the great Gwinnett County Public Schools. How are you, Dr. Watts?
I am doing so well, even better now. Thank you for having me.
We're so glad to have you here.
Thank you.
We want you to start off by telling us what it's like being superintendent.
Well, I often joke with some of our students when they ask, what's a superintendent? And I share with them that my parents intended for me to be super. So it makes sense that becoming a teacher and leading in local school and district office, becoming a superintendent is a dream job. It's hard work and it's hard work. It's what I share with our community. The responsibility I take very seriously. I often share with our community that my wife and I have 181,000 children. That's how seriously I take this work. I also know that the families whom we serve, they're counting on us to make sure that when we are in charge of their children, that we want to make sure that we see them as our very own, that we reach and teach each and every child as if they had our last name. That's a philosophy of mine that's been with me since I began my teaching career. And I still see myself as a teacher. I just happen to do it in a role as superintendent of the largest school district in the state of Georgia.
All right, now, since you have the largest school district, you have the largest budget. Do you have the largest budget?
I believe it's one of, if not the, I would imagine it's very close at $3.2 billion.
$3.2 billion.
That's correct.
So you are actually operating an industry where the product happens to be human lives.
That's correct.
Tell us about the makeup, the demographics of Gwinnett County and what makes it so different from other school districts in the state.
Absolutely. Well, Gwinnett County has literally grown and changed, and some would say beyond recognition. I grew up personally in Washington State, but I grew up professionally in Gwinnett County Public Schools. So I served from 2001 to 2014, from assistant principal to assistant and associate superintendent prior to my first superintendency. That said, over the 13 years, the world descended upon not just Georgia, but the world descended upon largely Gwinnett County, about 30 miles north of Atlanta. Families who moved here from other parts of the world decided that it was a great place for them to live, to work, play, pray, and to stay. And over time, when I returned as superintendent in 2021, I found out just how significant the growth, the diversity, and our work now that includes not just diversity, because we say now that diversity is a fact, and clearly Gwinnett County is one of the most diverse counties in the country. As a matter of fact, our 2020 U.S. Census states that Gwinnett County is the 7th most diverse county in the country. What most people don't realize is that we are now approximately 82% students of color.
Oh.
And with that, 34% of our students are Hispanic, Latino, and 31% are African American. And so with that, we've seen some significant shifts and changes in our diversity, and that's a good thing. We reflect the world, and the dimensions of difference in the world are true, and they're present in our classrooms. As you might imagine, however, that also presents some challenges for some who may not have been ready for the change or may not have been appreciative of the change. But that's part of my job, is to make sure that we create a space and place and build a culture that supports the importance of diversity. One, it is a fact. Diversity is all around us. We see things in a different way. We need to appreciate differences and dimensions of different. What we're also engaging in, and I'm very proud of, especially our blueprint for the future, it focuses certainly on what we call the 4 E's. We believe that diversity is a fact. Inclusion is an intentional act. We also have to make sure that our students are ready for their future. What does that mean? They need to be empathetic. They have to do our very best, and that's what we teach. how do I make sure that I know to the extent possible what it's like to be you, what it's like to walk in your shoes as a teacher to a student, student to student, adults to adults. When I do that well, then I can better understand how to address your needs. As a teacher, that was what I longed for every day. How do I make sure that you know how to read and write, solve algebraic equations, to think critically about the world around you today, tomorrow, or when you graduate? That's our goal. Ultimately, when we can do that well, then we reach effectiveness. That's the 30. But we want to make sure that we're getting not just results, because if we do nothing, we'll get results, right?
That's right.
But we want to make sure that we're getting the desired results. That's effectiveness. That's our third strategic priority of the 4 E's. And the fourth E is that notable standard to which we all should aspire. That's excellent in every way: academic, social, emotional, behavioral, so that when our students graduate, when they leave us, we want to make sure they're not just prepared, but they're ready for their future, not our past. Simple, just not easy.
So I want to talk a little bit more about diversity and the
Yes.
makeup of Gwinnett, because I remember even here in 20 years ago, that was our fastest growing county.
Absolutely.
Because I'm a native of DeKalb County
Okay.
all of my life, right
Okay.
next door. Now, you once worked for Gwinnett Schools, and then
Yes.
you became superintendent up in your home state, Washington.
That's correct.
From the role that you were in before to the role that you are in now, I want you to tell the audience, tell all of us, some of the things that you may not have known when you previously worked for the district in your role,
Right.
and some of the things that you discovered in coming back. And the reason I'm saying that, because I followed you quite carefully, and I've just admired, I actually have, the fact that you have been traveling through the district, getting to know the schools, getting to know the population, getting, so that, I guess, so you try to understand them more, or what were you looking for? So go ahead on and elaborate on
No,
that.
I like the word you use, looking. And so that's really, we are visual beings, and most of what we take in, if those who are capable of seeing, that's the first thing we notice. We notice what we see around us, for those who are visually capable. The reality is, I began my re-entry to Gwinnett County Public Schools after my previous superintendency with a look, listen, and learn tour, otherwise known as my entry plan. But I branded it so that people would know exactly what to expect when they saw me in their schools, or saw me having a conversation with someone, in a part of our organization that they might not have expected to see me, such as our bus barn or our cafeteria. And what I wanted to do was to make sure that I had a clear sense of the what, the how, the where, the when, and most importantly, the why. Why are we doing what we're doing? And how well are we doing it? So I asked thousands of questions to students, staff members, teachers, paraprofessionals, leaders within the organization, leaders in the community, faith-based leaders, business, chamber, asking them, what is it that you love about Gwinnett County Public Schools? What is it that we can do better, in your opinion? Where are we presently addressing needs? Where are we falling short? And how might we become that continued school district employer of choice? Those are questions that I asked early and often, and I heard the truth. In most instances, I think I heard the truth.
So tell us about some of those truths. What did you find? In other words, I want you to compare and contrast the former administration that was there. It's unheard of, actually, and you didn't say this. I'm saying it, 25 years, and that could be a positive, that could be a negative.
Sure.
And when a person is in any job 25, 30 years, the job, actually, they become institutionalized. And sometimes the board becomes complacent. I didn't watch that board that long, but it's a small board with only 5 people, meaning it's very manageable. I know some school districts have much larger boards.
Correct.
And it was an all-white board. I'm going to say that because I find it almost impossible to understand what's happening in the Laotian community or in the Hispanic community or in the white community, because I do so much concentration on my community. And not until I go out and start empathizing, et cetera, and know what the needs are and what the values are and what the expectations are, can I serve my constituency or the people who've elected me.
Right.
So tell us, comparing and contrasting. First, I want you to do the contrast for us in terms of the last administration that was there and the new administration, because you've only had about 18 months. You're new.
That's correct.
So you're going to have to talk about some of the things that you expect to accomplish also in that.
Sure.
I'm not trying to lead you, but
I understand.
go ahead.
So let's talk about, if we want to speak about contrasting, what was it like when I served for the 13 years? From 2001, my first job in Gwinnett County Public Schools as assistant principal at Bethesda Elementary School. My last job was as associate and assistant superintendent, and that was the last set of roles that I served in prior to my first superintendency in Washington State. I will say this, that the vast majority of conversations that I recall, we spoke a great deal about and set expectations high for excellence. And what I would say is, if we begin and end with excellence, I think that was really our standard of application. So how do we start something? How do we roll out something? And then ultimately, what are the end results that we would expect to see from a program or initiative, whether we were partnering with a consultant or whether we were engaging in our academic knowledge and skills, our curriculum standards, whether we were providing professional development for our teachers so that we could ensure that students could know and be able to do what we expected them based on those curriculum standards. And I was there certainly during the time where gateway exams, I actually, when we think about what does it mean to have an exam that is essentially whether it determines your success, whether you, high stakes exam, whether you move forward or whether you need to take additional courses to ensure that you've mastered the content. In theory and in truth, the goal was to make sure that we maintain high standards of academic performance, and yet there were times when students succeeded. There were also times when students could not get past that finish line. Mm-hmm. And so we have examples of families and children who suffered some trauma, if you will, because they felt that their opportunity for post-secondary success was limited at best, if not eliminated, because they were not able to pass that test. So that was one contrast, I think, that was certainly different from my experience in my previous organization. As you fast forward, when I came back, so 21, what had changed? Literally everything in my mind. 6 years I was gone, and returning back to the place where I grew up professionally was unique. It was exciting. It was also nerve-wracking. My wife reminded me, and I shared with our community, and she's my counselor in chief, and said it almost prophetically, because it wasn't a conversation that we're having, but she just said, you know what, hey, it's on my heart, I've got to tell you something. And Verdaillia, she said, remember, before you begin your first leadership team meeting, remember this. Remember that people will think they know you just because they knew you. And a hush fell over the crowd. I paused, I thought, I reflected, I said, wow, I had never thought about that. Because I look in the mirror, I see me. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily see all of the fundamental shifts and changes that I've gone through intellectually, socially, emotionally, from my past experience as a superintendent in another school district to my current experience, all the sum total of my experience in Gwinnett for those 13 years, thinking that and assuming that all would be the same. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. Mm-hmm. When I returned, I had changed. Gwinnett had changed. There were people who had come to Gwinnett from not just other parts of the country, other parts of the world. Mm-hmm. So it was a value proposition that was exciting at the same time. It was very new. Again, a new proposition, new role, a new board, new students, and a new strategic plan and planning process that we were just engaging in. And so that sense of newness for me was exciting because I grew up as an only child. I grew up with my parents providing me with opportunities to experience diverse settings, places. We traveled, whether it was a Sunday drive after church or a drive to Moses Lake to go fishing on Labor Day, Memorial Day, or for me to travel abroad or go 3,000 miles away for college to go to Howard University. That was my lesson in living for my parents. Go forth, see the world. Make sure you have experiences that no one can take away from you, but also that prepare you for anything and everything.
So I've always thought it's good for especially young people to see others in roles who look like them.
Yes.
And who look different, but who look like them
Yes,
also.
understood.
But I'm listening to you say your new strategic plan.
Yes.
What's the difference in your plan, your strategic plan, and the one that existed before you arrived
Sure.
in Gwinnett?
I think if I were to compare the two or contrast the two, the difference in terms of contrasting the strategic plan that we developed, and certainly the brainchild in my previous organization, I've always known a plan to have a clear and present set of standards and to have a time and space continuum, meaning there's a place where you start and there's a place where you end.
With
And
some
within that time-
measurables.
and within
Yeah.
that time, you have a measurable set of either key performance indicators or actual goals that we are intending to meet based on student performance, based on academic or behavioral performance, based on operational aspects. And so what we were able to accomplish from the Look, Listen, Learn tour, so keep that in mind, this was not a strategic plan that just emerged out of thin air.
Or from some consultant?
Correct.
Okay.
No, this was
It was real.
This was an organic process,
Uh-huh.
one that I had engaged in previous organization, and the goal was to see and ask from the questions that we posed, what's working well, what needs to be improved. We heard diversity is a strength in Gwinnett, but it was not necessarily identified as such. It was not necessarily held to that standard. And so if we're looking at diversity and viewing it as a strength, then we want to make sure that the dimensions of difference that exist, whether it's race, ethnicity, gender, whether it's linguistic ability, whatever those dimensions of difference, we want to celebrate those and elevate.
So you are extrapolating the value out of that diversity
Absolutely.
for everybody, for the
Yes.
students and for the community and et cetera, and for the growth.
Yes.
New industries can come out of that too. You do know
Absolutely.
that, right?
And that's what we're preparing our students for, the world that did not exist 6 years ago in Gwinnett or 13 years ago, the world that exists now. And we talk about that every day. We're preparing them for their future, not our past. Because when I was, the value proposition of graduation when I was in high school was vastly different than what it is now, particularly the opportunities that we have available for our students, not just in high school, but in middle school, in elementary school.
Now, you don't have to talk about this, but I want to talk about it. Anytime that you have a district that has a board, and we looked at the votes,
Sure.
that I wouldn't say necessarily rubber stamps what the superintendent says and does, but very, very seldom votes against that superintendent. Person who has been in place for 25 years, because superintendents don't belong to you. You know that, right?
Sure.
Okay. And you have such a diverse population, and all of a sudden you start getting a different type of board and a different type of superintendent that must prevent some challenges. And I don't know why you're still looking young and fresh, because I know you've been running around doing a whole lot of things in Gwinnett County. We want to talk about that. But tell us some of the challenges that you have had, real challenges, that presented themselves and sometimes will try to prevent you from being the best CEO, the best face, the best economic officer, because people expect the superintendent to know everything. You do know that, right?
Absolutely.
So tell us what some of those obstacles are, and then tell us how the community can help you, because you not only have the largest school district
Yes.
with a very large budget and a whole lot of folk looking at that money.
Yes.
I'm just going to say it, y'all. A lot of folk look at money in school districts, and that's what a lot of these agendas are about. And the superintendents and the teachers and the people who are working are having to, overcome all that, right? And still deliver education for the child. So, and then tell us how the community can help, because we want, and I'm gonna talk about this thing I saw on your website called Coffee with Calvin. I think that's a fantastic idea. I wish it was my idea,
We can share.
because this is a way that the superintendent goes to the people when the people can't come to the superintendent.
Right.
So talk about what I just said.
So let's start with really the initial. You're asking about what is it really like, and
Some of those challenges and how the community can help you with those challenges, because when they do, they help our children.
right. I think first, when we think about a challenge right now, a challenge is how do we make sure that our value proposition in our core business is operationalized, meaning we have 181,000 students who come to us every day.
The size of a town.
Correct.
Yes.
With their families, their caregivers, their parents, all wanting the same thing, maybe in a different way, but wanting success. They want their students, by and large. Every parent, every caregiver wants their child to be able to read, to be able to be literate, which means they need to be also able to read and write. They want them to be able to solve algebraic equations. They want to be able to think critically about the world around them. They want them to be able to get along with others, to learn how to socialize in a social structure, which is what school is in large part. That takes a valiant effort of resources called professional learning. It takes hiring and attracting and before that recruiting excellent educators to be a part of this team. And we've branded our team GCPS, and it was purposeful. The idea is that we all have different skill sets, different talents, but when we're all working towards the same goal, which is the purpose of a team, then we shouldn't have differences of opinion that get in the way. That's another challenge. One point that I would make, that this is a very different time for teaching and learning. When I returned, so keep in mind what was happening.
COVID.
We were on the tail end of COVID.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, in my previous organization, we were the first to close in Washington State. We were about 9 miles from the Kirkland Life Center, and we had a situation that really compelled us to have really no other choice but to do that. So that was one of the first initial challenges in my previous organization. But we were on the tail end, or so we thought, of COVID when I arrived, and that was the first what I would call shot across the bow, where I introduced myself as a known commodity, but also a new leader. So there was that dichotomy of I'm the same person, but as my wife reminded me, I'm not really the same person. Never will be, because I've changed, I've grown. Well, what was happening? The whole world was still in the midst of the tail end of the pandemic. When I arrived, I learned from my wonderful experience leading alongside one of the strongest union states in the country, and from an education standpoint, it taught me how to be a much better leader, how to listen, how to engage, how to negotiate.
That's an advantage you had.
Absolutely.
That some of our folk don't have here.
It was part of my being. I learned a great, but to systematize and make sure that it was a process that I understood. I ended up putting we had 11 employee groups in my previous organization, just to give you some context, 9 of which had bargaining units. So when COVID was here, we were negotiating with our paraprofessionals we supported paying for their fit tests, for their N95 masks, making sure that safety was #1 priority. When I arrived, while the negotiation portion of teachers' unions and union strategy was not the same, I made myself a promise. I said, I'm going to still lead in the same way. Now, we have associations, but there are no collective bargaining agreements. At the same time, I still pay the same homage and call people in, which is exactly what I learned how to do. Calling people in meant that even if we disagree, and especially if we disagree, let's sit down at the table and talk about it. I had a monthly meeting with the teachers union president. I ended up because I couldn't devote that same amount of time to each president of each union, I did the next best thing. And I did talk with my team, and I said, hey, what do you think if we put the actual leaders of each union on cabinet. And then we can A, hear from them, B, take every excuse away when they say, well, we don't hear from, we don't ever have an opportunity to say. Let's take all of that away and give them a seat in the circle or a seat at the table. I use the same strategy now in Gwinnett. I call people in. What I realized is that people were upset. When I arrived, the first people I called in, they said, you know you have a billboard with your face on it. I said, no, I didn't know that, but I had heard rumors. I said, what? They said, yeah, it's got a mask on it, because they heard that you were not going to, you were going to make us wear a mask. I said, well, we're going to follow. I said, I'm an English major, not an epidemiologist. I said, we're going to follow the guidance of CDC, and these are the next steps we're going to take. Well, you might have thought I would have, said we're going to do something divisive or divisive, as the saying goes, and it was a very divisive and divisive time, because no matter what option that we chose, someone somewhere was going to be disappointed. Yeah. And so those are the lessons that I learned, that I think understand that differences of opinion, they're ever present. How we respond to them, though, and that's the teaching that I share with people, that how we respond is most important, because, oh, by the way, our children are watching. And we're seeing some behaviors from our adults that we wouldn't accept from our children. And yet, that most important art and science of teaching is modeling. We're seeing some of the behaviors happening in our schools. I believe it has a great deal to do with what some of our students have experienced post-COVID and when they were certainly in COVID from a socialization standpoint. But I'm not convinced that there's some other aspects of our children are seeing our adults acting in ways that we would say, that seems rather childlike. That seems rather divisive. Why is that? And I think right now that's a real conversation for us to have. But the focus has to be, even though that's something that's happening, I want to remind everyone, we're not going to let that veer us off course. And I do believe there's a reason why some people want to do that, because we are making some significant changes. Our strategic plan and planning process has called out, as I mentioned, our 4 strategic priorities of empathy, equity, effectiveness, and excellence. But it's also called out the brilliance of diversity. The fact that we are one of the most diverse school districts in the country, the fact that the world is now here, most importantly, that we're wanting each and every child to be equally successful once they leave Gwinnett County Public Schools, and certainly while they're here. So we want to give them every opportunity possible, and that's exactly why I am proud to serving alongside a board that looks very differently, that responds very differently, that maybe votes very differently. But to me, that's the beauty of diversity. How do you, when you can operate and make decisions that impact positively the world around you, and you do so with people who have different belief systems, that means you can do anything. If we put our minds to it, we can solve problems that have never been solved before. We can prevent problems that people haven't seen, and we can make sure that our students are successful, that they're able to lead once they leave. They're able to be quality individuals and citizens. And I'm preaching to the choir, but the reality is, this is why I love this work. It's hard work, but I would say, and it's also hard work, because that's why I love it so.
And it also shows the virtue of humility, because none of us can survive by ourselves, and we can learn from each other.
Absolutely.
Now, in saying that's a great segue into something else I've observed about your district. I have noticed that you have been, I guess, ahead of everybody else in making sure that what we call special education personnel is taken care of, hired, et cetera, and that students on all the spectrum in terms of special education are taken care of. And that I've known that we do have a problem with you, though. Y'all, we got a problem with this superintendent. This superintendent should not be working 7 days a week. And that's why we want people to support this superintendent. He's just walked into the Gwinnett County. He's doing such a great job. We want everybody to support him. I'm just flat saying it. Now, when we have something against you, we're going to say it. Okay? People know my mouth may look halfway small, but it's kind of big.
I understand.
All right. So you have been having special job fairs, I've noticed, and I want you to tell us about that. I want you to tell us about different things you've been doing with transportation.
Yes.
I want you to tell us about career,
Yeah.
technical education and training and CTE. And
Sure.
I want you to tell all those different aspects of the school
Yes.
system that you have been directly involved in to make sure that the children are served and the taxpayer is greatly served.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. I always have an opportunity to brag about the great work that's taking place. I may have the the yeoman's portion of the good, the bad, the indifferent because of my role. But I also know and learned a long time ago we cannot do this work by ourselves. I wouldn't even want to try. And so we make sure that we're hiring, certainly recruiting, attracting, hiring, and retaining an incredible workforce that includes our teachers, includes our district office staff. So you did mention maybe 6 days a week, sometimes 7. Well,
You have to watch the
generally
Georgia
speaking,
game
we
sometime,
have to,
right?
absolutely. But
I'm
this past Saturday, so where was I? About 9 o'clock, I arrived in my office, and 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. Sometimes it's a good space and place for me to get some work done because it's really quiet. But this day wasn't that day. The year prior, we make plans to anticipate our needs from a staffing standpoint, and we know there are some shifts in staffing that my wife was a teacher in a related resource, and she began her career as a teacher of students with an active IEP. Loved the work, became a counselor as a result. I understand the need, and right now the need and the actual numbers and supply that we have is not near enough based on our needs in Gwinnett County Public Schools. So we're having to adjust our time schedule, so shrinking the distance between our job fairs so that we can catch individuals who might be thinking about moving from one position to another or moving from one district to another.
Competition is listening.
I'm
Go
just
ahead.
saying.
Jesus.
Hey, this is one
Wow.
way. Yeah, so we have to do that. And so guess what? So we offered a Saturday job fair and had planned that weeks and months prior to. And from 9 to, it was about 12, 1 o'clock, I was there greeting first of all, our leaders who were spending their time. So I took pictures, and I usually post on social media and let people know the good, meaningful work that's taking place, that our teachers, that our principals, our assistant principals are investing time, partnering with our HR team. And we not only, and we make this a big deal, and we've actually changed the culture. So it's not just about a process that we engage in. We bring candidates in and hope to hire them. No, we're Team GCPS. So what does that mean? So we have coaching conversations for individuals who are just now interns. We have interviews that are set up that are working like clockwork. So when one is done, there's a waiting area and the next person comes in. And if a contract is issued, it's much like, when you have you might hear a bell ring, you might hear people screaming and yelling, and everyone gets a team jersey. So what does that mean? So our foundation invested to make sure when I first arrived, I said, we are GCPS. We are Gwinnett County Public Schools. But whenever we're together, and our value proposition is making sure that our youngest learners and leaders become our most effective older leaders and learners once they leave us, we transform into Team GCPS. And so we have actual T-shirts that we gave to each individual who signed a contract. That was their jersey, and they were able to leave. You would have thought we had given them a bar of gold, but that notion that they are part of something special, and that they were there and they were committed, because who would come to a job fair on a Saturday unless they truly wanted to be there?
Right.
And we know that. And so we want to make sure. So that's the value proposition as well. If you're here, that means you really want to be a teacher. We want to make sure you become the very best teacher, not just for the job, but for the mission of saving lives. And I believe that when education works well,
Yes.
we're preventing things from happening that can be dangerous to us. So that was again a typical Saturday. So if it's not at a job fair, it's at one of our students who I met, playing in the championship basketball game, or seeing one of our girls' soccer games, or it's the Lunar New Year celebration at one of our high schools.
Mm-hmm.
It is time for me to connect and engage with our community, because it's the superintendency is the one position in a school district where there's only one, generally speaking. Mm-hmm. And so I have to make sure, to the extent possible, that I can kind of transform myself into multiple beings. Well, my wife says the world can only stand one Calvin J. Watts, so I do my best to be as ever present as possible, but also taking care of self too.
Mm-hmm. And I understand that Dr. Watts is also, he has a son that's very successful, that have come up through his tutelage and through schools and et cetera. But I'm gonna let him talk about himself, Calvin Watts, the man, in a minute. But I want to go back to something.
Please.
You have an aging teaching force,
Yes,
as so many counties do, and that plays into retention of teachers as we try to recruit teachers in this field. It is hard. There are various reasons why we can't get teachers, keep teachers. Teach for America, different folk are trying it. And some of these young people, they get in there and they're right back out of the door, but they get those loans paid off.
Right.
Some of them, thank God, do stay.
Sure.
And so many things must happen before we can retain and continuously grow the type of teachers that we used to have. Is your mother an educator? Did anybody in your family was an educator?
I had several. So I'm a third generation college student. My grandmother was a paraprofessional at Garfield High School, in Seattle Public Schools. My mom was a school nurse, and her last job on the face of this earth was Chief of Disaster and Health Services for American Red Cross Eastern Operations. When I was at Howard, she was in Alexandria. My aunt was a 47-year veteran teacher and administrator in Seattle Public Schools. So education was really at the core of our household growing up.
Mm-hmm. And so most of us who have come up with parents who were civil servants know the value of having integrity and honesty and hard working, just hard work really, but we have to learn how to relax and giving back to the community. And you seem to have to come from a family like that. I was surprised to hear you talk about all of those facets of employee groups that you negotiated with.
Yes.
I have a relative, I'm not going to call your name, who works for a very large company, and I won't name the state, I was about to. But when he was younger and he knew I was head of a teachers union, he used to just always be on my back about the teachers union. When he then rose through the ranks, and he had men that he was responsible for, he asked me one day, "What you mean you don't have a contract?" I said, He said, "How in the world you getting the thing done?" He said, "I'll bring people in and say, this is what the contract says, man, look, this will get you fired." See, in other words, he is working with the contract, and you had so many to deal with. Now, when you have folk with that kind of background, then you learn respect on both sides. It's a give and it's a take, and it's an understanding of what your employees need and how to empathize with them and put in, because you were an educator, you were a classroom teacher yourself, and you're not an old man by a long shot, so you're not out of touch. But that helps solidify, would you agree, that your base of employees?
Absolutely. We meet when we have systems that have been in place in Gwinnett County Public Schools. The goal is to see how we can enhance them. One is our Teacher Advisory Council. So we meet with a cadre of teachers, and those employee groups include middle grades, elementary, high school. We also created, first of a kind, a student advisory, and superintendent student advisory. The first year we had about 70 students total. And it was, again, the first of a kind. We wanted to elevate student voice, amplify the students' experience, make sure that they knew they were part of the solution and not just a problem. So if they were a part of the problem, then they also need to be part of the solution. After that first year, this beginning of this year, we had 2,000 applications that were
Wow.
submitted.
Woo.
600 were reviewed, and we created a system of review. I was very proud. I said this was the standard. We're going to make sure that that we have a student advisory that reflects the dimensions of difference of our demographics in Gwinnett County. We were able to do that.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. All right. Now, two more things I want to say. One is that I am just really, really taken aback in a good way about what I saw on your website, Coffee with Calvin. And I'm thinking if I was a Starbucks and anything else, I would be helping to sponsor this school district. Tell us about Coffee with Calvin. I mean, it's so interactive. It's so personable. Tell us all about it and why we want everybody to tune in to Coffee with Calvin.
I appreciate that. And Coffee with Calvin really is the brainchild of a group of leaders who sat down together, and we said, hey, how do we teach, not just tell? How do we make sure that people, families, community have a sense of what in the world goes on in the public school system, particularly one that's as large as Gwinnett County Public Schools? And so from that, it turned into, well, let's bring our cameras, let's write a script, and then let's teach. Because Dr. Watts, you're a teacher. You always say that, right? I said, yeah, I always consider myself a teacher. And it began with our first episode, which was beginning at the bus barn. And we went to our bus barn, met with our bus leads and those who were working in the operations side of the house. And we had a full day. So the morning, so we literally had, this, we had to actually edit out the sound of the chicken that was
You had a rooster crowing or something?
Crowing. It was early in the morning. And you heard the
yeah, it was
the
early.
rooster. It was hilarious. So we had to make sure that we got the shots in. But I say that to say, what did we do? The purpose was to make sure we focused on safety. Because this is the beginning of the year, and we know that our children are our family's prized possession. And I remember, I drove Devin to school most of the time, but even when he got out of the car, I watched every step he took till he got to the door, and then only then was I able to drive off. We want to make sure that our families understood the impact of what it means to ride a bus in Gwinnett County Public Schools, the importance of it, the depth and breadth of it, the fact that we have the fourth largest fleet in the country.
Fourth largest.
Yes, and so we think about that we have 180,000 students. We transport about 140,000 of those students
Safely every day.
Every day. And so how do we do that safely? Well, what we had to do is really show, not just tell, and that's the beauty of our communications team, our broadcast team. So.
Oh, you have some remarkable principals too, because I've heard from some
Oh.
how happy they are. And for a teacher, my other role is president of a union.
Right.
For principals to call me and say these great things about, I'm getting off the subject, I know. Say these great things about what's going on and the delivery of the students and the buses, everything on time, and the remarkable bus drivers. Mr. Cooley, thank you. You've been on Let's Talk, telling us the great things before we even met your superintendent about the bus fleet. But go ahead.
No, it's no doubt, and we've, we achieved great success and awards based on our drivers and the time that we take, the time that we invest. But it's most important for our community to understand the how and the why, so that when they have a situation, and this is preventative care. So I always, my parents always taught me it's better to be able to prevent a problem than to try and solve it. So we now have relationships between drivers. They make sure they know the children, that they understand that their purpose is to make sure that our students are safe, that they're delivered safely to and from school. I learned what it means to drive a bus, even for 10 feet. Now, I don't have my CDL, so I couldn't drive for long. But they did invite me back for the bus barn rodeo I wasn't able to make it this year, but I'm gonna be there next time. But I learned what it meant to make sure students were safe, and that there were 74 checkpoints before any child gets on the bus.
Yep.
That's important for a family to know, that they can trust when they have their prized possession, their 5-year-old getting on a bus to go to kindergarten for the first time.
The parent can just go right on to work or do whatever he or she needs to do, and
Yes.
the kid is safe from the time that they get on that bus
To the
time they get back home.
That's correct.
But yeah, Mr. Cooley really drilled us in that. I had no idea that
Most
so
people
much
don't.
was involved with bus drivers and monitors.
Yes.
Until I heard
Absolutely.
from him directly.
It is an incredible operation. I learned a great deal, but it also made me a better leader, because then I could at any time, if I had a conversation with a parent or someone in the store, which I have often, I can talk about now the fleet. I can talk about the safety. I can talk about what it means when a student gets on a bus and when they are heading back to their seat. There's a reason why. When most parents will ask, why don't we have seatbelts? Well, it's because if there were an accident, we don't want students to be trapped. But we don't even think about that, because why? Because we are so incredibly thoughtful about teaching and training and making sure that our drivers they leave no stone unturned when it comes to the training process. And I'm proud of our operations team. And certainly, if we think about it, that team makes teaching and learning happen more effectively. Because when our students are there on time, our students are there.
They're conditioning those kids when they get on the bus and off. I've heard, like, I keep mentioning this man's name,
That's
Cooley.
good.
I said, I didn't know you were teaching also, and making sure, like, where are your books? Where your book bag? Did you do your homework?
That's
that kind of thing.
That's
I'm
right.
like, wow. Now, I don't want to veer too much on this, but I want all nurses to understand. I know we need more nurses,
Yes.
and we're advocating for more nurses, not only in the hospitals, but in the schools for our children, because they're populations that we must serve, that only nurses can really help us out with. So I want y'all to understand, as this superintendent talks to all personnel, nurses, I know you have a lot of problems, but come with some solutions, because guess what? Psst, his mother was a nurse. So he understands that too. Now,
Indeed.
I'm going to let the superintendent have some closing statements, but what I want him to include in those closing statements, who is Calvin Watts? Do you jog? Do you like cookies? Tell us about you as the man, so everyone will know. I mean, this superintendent is a delight, y'all. Of the largest school district in Georgia, he really is a delightful person. Go ahead.
No, I appreciate that. So most people don't know. I love to laugh. I grew up, I played all sorts of sports. My parents put me on all kinds of teams. So whether it was speech and debate team, soccer team, basketball team, baseball, I played all sports growing up. All my uncles were athletes and scholars. The first book I ever read twice, it's one of my favorite trivia questions, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Willy Wonka. So why is that? People ask, well, why'd you read the book twice, and why was that so important? First of all, I'm a chocoholic, so just know that. Anything chocolate, I will eat it. I'll eat breakfast, lunch, dinner, in moderation, but I love chocolate. The reason why I read that book twice and appreciated it so much, because it was the first time that I felt the need to read a book twice. One of my strengths is context, and I didn't know it at the time. But I recognized when I read the book at a different stage or a different season, or I put it down for a month and read it again, I always found something that I connected with in a different way. But I was, I would pause, because I was like, this is the same book. So wait a minute. So in my mind, I was thinking on thinking. It was that metacognition that I didn't really know what it was at the time, but as a teacher, it was the brilliance of being able to be in a space and experience something different. And I recognized that when I read it again, I said, I can see something different. So for me, it was that notion of critical thinking. That's who I am as a leader. So I'm constantly surveying and thinking about what's next. What can we do differently? How does this process that didn't work, if we tweak it, how might it impact this group of students? I also love to cook. my wife says, out of all of she'll say my positive traits, that is what sold her, and she told the truth. So our first date, I made fresh salmon and no, actually that was the second. So the first date, no, let me tell the truth. The first date was breakfast for dinner, as I asked her, and homemade waffles, strawberries, and I literally hand whipped the cream. I'm just saying. Mm-hmm. So, love cars, love to travel, love to read, love people, and I love being an educator. I love being a superintendent. It's the hardest work. It is a joy, though, to see what we've been able to accomplish in such a relatively short period of time. 18 months, 5-year strategic plan in place, operating with a focus on many of our most vulnerable students who needed help in ways and they may not have been receiving those supports, such as our focus on structured literacy and making sure that students are able to read and have phonemic awareness and understand the concepts of what they're reading sooner so that they can actually learn from the text and the complexities of those texts as they grow older. Mm-hmm. As an English major at Howard, I fell in love with the art and science of reading, but also teaching, and that's when I had to raise eyebrows when I came to Georgia and I heard that we were teaching critical race theory, and I said, no, I know we're not. I said I took literary criticism at Howard, and I know we studied all sorts of theories, but this is not one.
Right.
But that's a whole nother topic.
A whole nother agenda, a political one at that. But okay.
No, but that's Calvin Watts in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Who you see is what you get, and proud to serve, indeed.
Dr. Watts, we have been just so glad to have you here, and we want to have you come back.
Yeah, love to.
And hey, y'all, when y'all get this, share it so that you will keep up with Dr. Watts and our great school district, Gwinnett County, and may he have many years, long life, and all success to Gwinnett, because when Gwinnett succeeds, Georgia succeeds. Thank you very much.
My name is Terry Stalker. My relationship to the school system is that I have 3 boys, the oldest of which is now 18. They all started school in kindergarten in Gwinnett County Public Schools. So I've had kids in the system. I love Gwinnett County Public Schools. From a superintendent perspective, I am more confident than I ever was. Gwinnett County Public Schools 20 or 30 years ago was minority white. Let's say, I should have pulled it up before the call, 80% white, 20% people of color, right? Roughly. That is completely flipped. I couldn't be more happy about it. Bumps in the road, absolutely, but this is the right thing. Prior to Dr. Watts, Mr. Wilbanks, from what I understand, had the local media really in his pocket. They decided what got published and what didn't get posted. I really love that for the first time ever, we have a strategic plan with associated KPIs. How they ever did Wilbanks's assessments in the past, I have no idea. I'm not kidding. There were no KPI. You couldn't say, here's the quantifiable metrics and here's how you did. I'm not kidding. It did not exist until Mr. Wilbanks or until Dr. Watts. Wilbanks never had it. It was a big, you rub my rub yours kind of scenario with the board as far as I'm concerned. I like that the plan incorporates these like wonderful, amazing concepts nobody could ever disagree with. Well, they can actually, they shouldn't. Equity, empathy, like these are so amazingly important in my mind. More than one person made the comment to me that I should not send my kids to Peachtree Elementary School, which is where my kids started out, the elementary school in Gwinnett, because they would be the only white kid in their class. And I was like, oh my God, like, is that a bad thing? Like, seriously, is that a bad thing? Like, I don't think that's about, I think that's an excellent thing. So happy to have the experience of being in a diverse environment because the world, oh, I'm sorry, my thing just came up with, the world is diverse. We live in a diverse world and people have different perspectives and different places they come from. And why wouldn't I want to understand that? You know, it enables empathy. It enables true relationships based on values. And so that's why I'm glad that my kids go to the school or in the system. On an A through F, I mean, I gotta say B plus. There's no doubt at all in my mind, zero, that what's driving the current fire watts, actually on bumper stickers, it's crazy. The whole fire watts scenario is that Will Banks was let go. No doubt, zero doubt. This is retribution. It's two things. It's retribution and it's, oh my God, we have a Black superintendent. Political nonsense. Paying you back for letting Will Banks go. And oh my God, there's an awful lot of Black people on the board right now. Between the board and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I'm just saying, like, that's what I think people are really thinking.
Derek Brown. I also go by another name, Arthur D.S. Brown. I'm an author. I've made Gwinnett County my home for almost 20 years. I love the place. I love being here. There's a saying that folks talk about, Gwinnett is great. And I think it's great not only in terms of where we live, but it's great in terms of its schools. That is what attracted a lot of people to this county. My point in terms of how things are operating in the county and what I do is I volunteer at my daughter's school. I've been volunteering at the schools that she's attended since she was in elementary school. Actually, no, there was preschool and kindergarten. I would do the junior achievement and all of those things because I think that's what you should do. And in terms of other things for the school, you know, what I try my best to do is keep a critical thinking, open mind and be a supportive parent. I'm part of the PTSA. I maintain continuing conversations with the school principal and I do whatever I can to uplift the student body where I can. So that's me and that's my relationship to the county. I think it's critically important. We know over the last couple of months, Gwinnett County has gotten a lot of attention around its behavior policies, the change and focus to restorative behavior practices. Now, the thing that I looked at as a parent and as an always aspiring critical thinker is that we know that restorative practices have not only just been trending because of what we know some folks hate as woke culture, but let's take that off the shelf and toss that out the window. Restorative practices have been proven to help kids in at-risk situations. So I think the idea was good, and we've seen that with this new administration. The execution is where we were lacking. And I attended the board meeting where they stated that. It's real clear. But the bottom line is, you know, and this is where the rubber really hits the road, CRT, the behavior policies, all of these things, and actually the transition from Alvin Wilbanks to Calvin Watts have all become political levers. That's the thing. And we know from one state to state to state to the next state that politics has been, you know, right at the center of education. It's the next wedge issue. And if we could throw that out, I think things would be a lot better. I think that Dr. Watts wanted to put something in place that reached the entire county. Now, the question then becomes, will he be given the grace to continue the work and try and fix what's gone wrong and put restorative and protective practices in place, right? It's not just the kids, it's the kids, the parents, the teachers, everyone in the community together. And I think that's where we should all want to go. It's not a place called nirvana. It's a place called realism where the student and the teacher can attend the school, feel safe, and all at once not find themselves caught up in a rapid fire process that takes them right out of the classroom and puts them in jail. And from jail, we know you go to prison. That's not applicable to all kids, but unfortunately it was to some. And that's where the change is. And we want to try to make sure that we can put something like that in place. It just takes time and focus. And again, critical thinking. The violence that folks are seeing in Gwinnett County schools, when you look at it trending over time, it's not new. It's not exacerbated beyond what we knew, if we really think about it, would come in general from a community standpoint out of a pandemic. And when you consider that, also a lot of the violence that folks contend is occurring, it's usually in some spaces off campus. We highlight what's happening on campus. We get that in the news, and they always want to bring that stuff up, and it makes for sensational television. I mean, it's, you can look at the news now and they've got the fast camera movements and all that. That's high production value. That's entertainment. And that's unfortunate. And that's what they highlight coming out of the schools. All of these things can only be done when the community comes together and engages appropriately with the folks on the board. Don't sit there and talk at them. Don't come to the meeting and bring signs and berate them. Certainly don't show up with the Let's Go Brandon t-shirt thing and bring your kid there and show that and think that that is really somehow appropriate and uplifting and engaging. Don't do that. Come up with the critical questions, come to the table and help define and divine good solutions. You know, Dr. Watts and the board was introducing a concept where we make changes in the curriculum and in school practices to try to be more accommodative to teachers, parents, and students. You know, and this is something that's being offered across the nation. You know, you just have to Google it, but you know, it's a challenging thing. You know, the American school system is like perhaps 4 or 5 super tankers attached together. You can't move one easily, let alone 4 or 5. Throw the politics out if you can, as you take a glance at the county, the way it's run. In terms of educating your child, again, I say without equivocation, that Gwinnett is great. You know, we've got our challenges just like everybody else. We've got the challenges across the economic line. We've got the challenges across the color line, which tend to persist, wish it would go away. And all of that feeds into our politics and our ideology. I want mine, you want yours, and we can't figure out how to get it together. Not true. Those things still persist in this county, but we do tend to find ways to work around it. The sliding scale to me is 7 to 9.5. Well, make sense of that. Making sense of it means there have been times and opportunities when we've been challenged and things didn't work the way we need them to work. That's the 7 piece. So we talk about intent in terms of challenges around scheduling for some schools. That's a function of the pandemic, I know, but still it could have been better. We talk about testing, honest feedback, integrating new systems into the piece when the systems aren't ready or haven't been stress tested or limit tested. You've got issues there. You got to make sure those pieces are in place before you pull the trigger and execute, even as you're confronting a time constraint, because when you got to test, you got to test. And then, of course, again, the restorative practices, the behavior issue that just loomed all over the news. That's not good. But again, I slide all the way up to 9.5 because of intent and a desire to make change. I know that that's the intent of the administration, and I would really want them to maintain that and continue.